Here's a little picture I drew just this week here of old Rick Grimes before he kind of got the full beard and when he was still playing sheriff with the cute little hat. So if you like this type of drawing and more, remember to follow me on all the social networks.
Walking Dead, Season 4, Episode 2, Infected.
Well, hello, my brothers and sisters of the Nerd Nation, or on Sunday nights, the Dead Nation, the Walking Dead Nation. I, of course, am Jim, here to bring you another review, this time on the second episode here of the fourth season. So, this overall I thought was a real good episode for a number of reasons. The first one, as far as being a season premiere, I was a little bit let down by, and I really shouldn't say it in that terms. I'm just saying that out of the first 4 seasons now, I thought that last week's was the weakest season premiere. However, I also understand that there needed to be some development as far as showing these new characters, some of which that had been brought in, of course, from the outside, from Woodbury, things like that. Now, we know at the end of last week's episode, of course, Patrick, something had happened to him. He had been infected or something because he had the red look to his eyes, very similar to the look of that one walker that Rick saw on his way out and as well on his way back in from meeting the crazy lady. So that's where things left off. We know that something was about to go down in Cell Block D, and that's kind of where things pick up. Not really, though. It starts out with Tyrese kind of, macking a little bit on his girlfriend, Karen, and really the whole time while they were talking, I was assuming that all of a sudden Patrick was going to appear and maybe bite Karen or Tyrese, but I was thinking Tyrese probably less likely because he's a little bit more of a main character. So there's like this 3-minute scene where they're talking and then they keep turning and then they go to turn to leave and she's got her back to the door and it's going to open and I'm like, oh God, and it's dark and then her flashlight goes out and I'm just thinking all these bad things. Then there's actually a scene where she goes into the showers in the bathroom where we presume that Patrick's body is, or now his corpse walking around, being reanimated, and she's walking around, and of course the flashlight goes out, all these classic jump scare horror type moments, and I was sitting there, with my oldest son and my wife, and we're all sitting there like, when's it going to happen? And nothing happened, so she winds up getting out of there, and then we see Patrick after that, and he kind of just lumbers off. He winds up going and actually walking right by Karen's cell, and you think, because they've got these curtains over all their cells, and you just see the shadow walk by and kind of stop for a second, and then he decides to go on. So this was definitely a Revenge of the Nerds type of scenario as far as just Patrick himself, and he's the one who voiced Phineas from Phineas and Ferb. So he goes on to the next cell and goes up and just clamps down and bites and rips out this guy's throat. He doesn't even get to scream. This is a no-name character that we don't know. We just know it's one of the new characters that's been introduced. And he completely kills him and just starts munching on him. Now, this is the middle of the night, mind you, right? So then we go and we get a scene where, Glenn and Maggie wake up, and they're, of course, they've been banging in the watchtower again and all this other sort of stuff. And we just kind of get this, everything's fine. Rick's out there. He's got up in the morning. Him and Carl are out getting ready to do some farming, And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, and it's what everybody's been waiting for, Glenn comes running out screaming, he's like, there's walkers in D, And then, of course, all the Billy badasses of the show go, and it seems like everybody else is helpless except for people like Glenn, Rick, Carol, Daryl, Tyrese, you know what I mean? These kind of main characters. It seems like everybody else, even if able-bodied, are only there to just kind of run away and scream from zombies. So we see some really good action as far as that scene goes. There were several walkers that wound up having to get taken out because what happened is Patrick went and started munching on the one guy, and then once he kind of woke up and as a zombie and got reanimated, he was like, oh, I'm going to move on to some fresh food, and then started killing others, it seemed like. And then I also believe that what happened, and they kind of alluded to this, is that whatever type of infection, flu, disease, whatever this is that's going around, whether it be airborne or whether it be something in what they eat, some kind of bacteria, we don't really know, but we do know that it is some kind of super flu almost, to where, you get sick in the morning and then, that night you can be dead. So it's very, very scary now to think about, the enemy from within. It could be somebody that's just coughing earlier in the day that winds up ripping your throat out in the middle of the night because they're a walking reanimated corpse. So there was definitely that sort of thing there. The action, as far as it goes, really was great. I mean, it was nice. There was just a couple of really cool kills by Daryl. And the thing that we see here is even when Rick runs in, Rick, I didn't notice this as much in the first episode because he didn't have his gun and Herschel had to tell him to take his gun with him. Rick has very much become like I almost lost my son because he went off the crazy train at the end of last season. So he's very much now trying to go in the last 6-7 months just sort of be like Farmer Rick. He doesn't want to be in charge. He doesn't want to make decisions that are life and death. He really doesn't even want to kill walkers because, Carl winds up asking him in the show if they can go, and there's a lot of walkers built up on the one. They're going to need extra people on the fence. Could we go do it? And then he's like, could I go do it? And Rick's like, nope, we're going to be farming today. So this is very much the Rick having to kind of, have a call to arms again because there's a need for it. So having others take his place with the council and everything else, he very much just wants to step back from it because when he comes into the cell block, someone hands him a gun and he immediately hands it to somebody else. And he's just trying to, herd people out of there and check people for bites and everything else. He's trying to direct people, but it's like he wants to show Carl, I think, his son, that you don't have to go and shoot everything in the face that moves. So I thought that was very profound. And then there's another spot towards the end of the episode, too, that it picks up on. So we lose a ton of people in this Cell Block D massacre, basically. There's a very touching scene, too, where Carol goes and herds this one guy, and we don't even know what his name is, but he has a bite on his arm, and she's getting ready to tie off his arm and amputate. And as she pulls him forward to go and do it, she sees that the back of his neck is bitten up as well. He has 2 daughters, and we saw also at the very, very beginning of the episode, we saw this thing where you just saw a hand and a flashlight, and someone has been going out to the fence and feeding live rats to these walkers, right? And the reason that I made the connection with this is because his 2 daughters, before he dies, and Carol has to put him down, his 2 daughters, Lizzie, and I forget the other one's name, he basically entrusts them to Carol and says, can you please watch them for me and, treat them as if they're your own. And she says, yes, absolutely. And then ultimately he has to be put down. It is a very touching scene. However, it's not as touching as it would be if you knew the character. You don't know the character, so you just kind of feel bad that, 2 kids have lost their dad. We also find in this episode, too, that Carol has kind of gone off the crazy train. And I don't know if everybody agrees with me or not. I know that she was physically abused by her husband. She probably feels like maybe a bad mother or a failure because she failed to protect Sophia. And then, of course, she died back in season 2. But Carol, last week we saw her teaching young kids without their parents' knowledge, without Rick's knowledge or consent or really anybody else's, how to use, deadly weapons. And although I can argue both ways, and I understand having to teach kids to a certain degree what's going on, I don't agree with how she's going about it because she even winds up later on in the episode talking to these 2 little girls who just lost their mother, and she's talking to the one about how you got to toughen up and you got to be able to act on instinct. And so during this whole catastrophe that happens too, we also see a moment where Michonne was leaving out and then wound up hearing the gunshots and coming back in because of the commotion. Carl let her in, but a couple zombies got in behind her as she got off her horse. She's trying to fight them back. She falls backwards, and it's looking like Michonne's going to be done. Carl goes and picks up a gun because they got hide guns everywhere around the prison, obviously, for moments like this. And he picks up that rifle, doesn't hesitate, blows that zombie's goddamn head off. And so that's my boy Carl over there. Now, I think he was getting a little crazy last year, but, at the same time, he does act without having to really put that emotion in there, which we've seen from him before. So he saves Michonne's ass. We get to see that. There's really a lot that happens in the episode because then later on in the episode, after the whole Cell Block D thing, because of these rats getting fed to these zombies, it's kind of riled them up and attracted more of them. And there's so many of them pushing against the fence. And this is the second kind of action scene of the movie, of the show that, Maggie and Glenn are or Maggie, I think it was, called him. She's like, Rick, you got to get over here, Daryl. And everybody's over there, of course. And there's hundreds of them just piling up against the fence and it's literally swaying, and they're trying to hold him back and trying to stab him as much as they can. Rick goes, and again, he doesn't want to have anything to do with this, but Rick kind of goes and he says, you know what? Daryl, go get the truck, right? And they wind up doing this cool thing where Rick has the pigs that they're going to have to kill anyway because they're not sure if this disease is being transmitted, by the pigs, by the animals, by the meat they're eating, or what, because obviously one of the pigs was sick in the last episode. So they go and they take this truck that's hooked up to this little trailer, and Rick is sitting on the trailer, and basically he has Daryl stop at various points about 100 feet away from the zombies on the outside of the fence, and he slices one of the pigs' bellies open and just kind of throws it at him. It's going to take them away from the fence long enough for them to be able to fortify it and get things pushed up against it. We also know, too, now from that weird zombie that was looking at Rick in the first episode, with the crazy bloodshot type of eyes, that those ones are people that we can presume are people that actually died of this disease and then came back as zombies, because they're all kind of like just their sort of faces exploded, and they explain it a little bit in the episode, too, and kind of, theorize some things. But ultimately, some of the great things that I took from this episode are then towards the end of the episode. Carl had a brief interaction with Carol, and actually it wasn't even that brief. It was kind of, Carol was like, "Are you going to tell on me?" And Carl's like, "I don't know. It's not right that you don't tell those kids' parents." And she's like, "Yeah, but maybe they'd agree with it. Maybe they wouldn't. I really don't want, though." She's, in her mind, she's just protecting everybody, right? And in his mind, he's like, "I don't want to lie to my dad." And she's like, "Well, don't lie to him. Just don't tell him, And they really are two different things. If he asks about it, that's fine, whatever. But the thing that I found the most profound about this episode, because this is really much about Rick, really just as much about Rick not wanting to kind of come back to that role of leadership. Daryl asked him early in the episode if he wanted to kind of step back in and things, and was kind of like, "Hey, brother, we could use you, right?" Rick wound up ultimately, he's out there, he's farming, he's talking with Carl, after all the commotion has passed, and Carl tells him what's happened with, what's going on with Carol, what she's doing. And he's like, "But you know what? I agree with it. I think that she should be able to teach them, so I don't want you to stop her, but you could, And anyway, he's like, I'm not going to tell her and this and that. And really, for me, it was a profound moment of trust between them, because when Carl killed that kid at the end of last season, Rick realized that he was not focusing on what was important, which was his family, what was left of his family, right? Lori had died. He was just going off the rails on the crazy train, man, and he really was. He didn't care about anyone or anything. It was just like the survival of the group, and whatever he had to do that. He pushed people away. He killed people. So he very much over the last 6-7 months in this time skip took the role of being a father, and Carl's been trying to be a good son, because he did ask him at the beginning of the episode too, when can I have my gun back? And this was to me, it was a very profound moment, because at the end of the episode, when Carl tells him that, Rick, I think, thought at that point, you know what? Number one, the shit's hit the fan. We never know when something or somebody could turn, because they've tried to separate people now that they think may be sick. Karen actually was coughing. That's Tyrese's girlfriend. And she was coughing. They had to separate her and a couple others that they thought may be sick, and kind of lock them in cells, so to speak, to keep them away from everybody in case they did turn. But Carl telling him that, and then all this danger being presented now, I think Rick's realizing that he cannot live in this idealistic, perfect world. He can't just be Farmer Rick, okay? He gives Carl his gun back, which I thought was very profound. And then he goes and he takes his gun belt out, his sheriff's belt, and he pulls out his big peacemaker over there and pops that sumbitch right back in the holster. And we know that Rick Grimes is back in town, and Little Sheriff is going to be right behind him with his gun now. And I don't think it's so much, profound, because it's like, oh, good, now Rick's going to shoot people, and we need that to make the show good. Not at all. I think Rick is the natural-born leader. I think he's the person that throughout the first 3 seasons, other than his little mental lapse that he had for about 5 or 6 episodes in the 3rd season, I think he's the person everybody looks up to. He's gotten them out of a lot of jams, you know what I mean? And he's strong, and he's smart, and he cares, So that's kind of what I took from it. And there was also a very funny part as well, too, where Michonne was real, tweaked out about being around the baby, Judith. And she was it looked like she was just sort of having some weird flashbacks. She didn't want to hold the baby to help Beth out. And I think that Michonne's deal, because she lost someone and everything else, I don't know what her backstory, her past is, but I think I suspect there's something that has to do with a baby of her own, that she maybe lost, and it's maybe lost in a terrible way to the zombie apocalypse. So, and the last thing that I kind of remembered too was that Carl, with his signature trademark hat that his dad gave to him, the sheriff's hat, somebody asked him, why don't you wear the hat anymore? And he's like, well, it's not a farming hat. And what that means is basically, hey, listen, that's a shooting zombies hat that my dad gave to me when he kind of passed the torch, so I'll put that one back on when I need to, All in all, though, I think a very good episode. I think it really did help to build, and everything that I've been reading and hearing about this season is that it starts off and just builds from there. So if that's the case, I don't need to have that first kick-ass episode, 1 or 2 episodes, and then 3 or 4 kind of filler, slow down, paced episodes. I want it to build to just something awesome, because the sneak peek at next week, boy, I'm just really excited. Overall, I think it was a great comeback for them, and ultimately, I think it was really nice to go and see some of these things. The final thing, though, and I did forget about this, is that at the end of the episode, Tyrese goes to visit his girlfriend, Karen, who's been kind of segregated off with other people, and he just sees like just a trail of blood inside her cell, and you're thinking, oh no, she turned, and there's one in another cell, and he's following this trail of blood out around the corner, and he follows it outside, and they're laying burned. The bodies have been burned. There's Karen and this other guy. I don't know who it was or whatever. So I don't know who the hell did that. Hopefully we'll find out soon, but that's kind of the cliffhanger they left us on. So my episode question for you, brothers and sisters, is who do you think was feeding the zombies? My personal opinion, one of the little girls. One of the little girls that was naming them and kind of thinking they're still people and everything else thought, oh, you know what, I'll give them some food. And that's my opinion on that one, or my particular prediction. So leave your answer to that question, brothers and sisters, in the comments down below. Feel free to hit that thumbs up, the like button if you should think that I deserve it. And, of course, subscribe if you haven't done so already. We will look forward to catching you in next week's episode. As always, brothers and sisters, thank you so much for watching, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. And, of course, you're a real trooper if you've watched the video this long. So, look forward to catching you in the next one, Nation.